In 1937, two Japanese army officers agreed to the most deranged contest of all time. Whoever could first kill 100 people using a sword would win. This was during the Japanese invasion of China, and so the two men started killing as many people as they could with their swords, and they both killed more than 100 people with their swords. So they decided to take the contest up to 150 people. They claimed all the killing was in close combat, but realistically they executed prisoners. They were celebrated, with newspaper articles being written about the contest, but this made it hard for them to deny. Both men were later executed for war crimes. There are numerous accounts of Japanese soldiers engaging in cannibalism. Most accounts were from remote areas of East Asia. Allied attacks on supply routes left Japanese soldiers starving, and in desperation they would consume the corpses of dead people. In some cases they would cut the flesh off of living prisoners, and when too much flesh was taken, the prisoner would be left to die. Some Japanese officers were found guilty and convicted on cannibalism. They were charged with preventing the proper burial of soldiers, as cannibalism wasn't yet specified as a war crime. After annexing Burma, the Japanese wanted a railway between Rangoon and Bangkok. But instead of employing people to build the railway, forced labor was used. At least 180,000 civilians and 60,000 Allied prisoners of war were forced to build the railway. It was built in 1943. Over 12,000 Allied prisoners died during its construction, many of which were beaten to death for working too slowly. Others died of exhaustion or from floods brought by monsoons. It came to be known as Death Railway, and for its construction, 111 Japanese officers were tried for war crimes. 32 were given the death penalty. Singapore fell to the Japanese in 1942. The Japanese then began to purge any people within Singapore who were hostile to them, but they were paranoid and saw almost everyone as being hostile. So the Japanese secret police arrested all Chinese people within Singapore and interrogated them as if they were plotting some kind of coup. They exterminated small villages rumored to be plotting against them, even without any evidence. In 1945, the Japanese were losing control of the Philippines. After refusing orders to leave its capital city, one group of soldiers engaged in a string of atrocities. As Allied forces were gradually capturing the city, the Japanese soldiers commit mass rape and murder, knowing they had no chance of escaping. By the end of the battle, at least 100,000 civilians were left dead. Some estimate that number to be closer to 500,000. Entire schools and hospitals were massacred, and as the Japanese got more desperate, some buildings were set on fire with civilians sealed inside. In many Japanese-controlled parts of Asia, native women were forced into sexual slavery. They were known as comfort women, and there might have been up to 400,000 of them. On capturing new territory, the most beautiful local women would be rounded up and taken to military stations, where they would be forced into prostitution. Some women went willingly under the promise of being given work as servants, but were then imprisoned with other comfort women. Many comfort women were not even women, being girls as young as 12. In the 3-month-long Battle of Bataan, American and Filipino forces were defeated by the Japanese. Following their surrender to the Japanese, they were made to march 60 miles so they could be herded into prison camps. They were given no rest, and anyone unable to keep up was bayoneted. Between 5,000 and 18,000 died in the march, and after the war, the general behind it was charged with 43 counts of crimes against humanity, for which he was executed. But before the Japanese surrender, many thought one day he could be the Prime Minister of Japan. The Japanese military had a policy of using torture for interrogating prisoners of war. It was a standard method of extracting information from captured allies, but the prisoners were often executed afterwards. People also gave false information to avoid being tortured more. That's what Marcus McDilder did. He told them the US had 100 atomic bombs, and after Hiroshima, other Japanese cities would soon be destroyed. Some say this false information caused the Japanese to surrender. It's also said they used bamboo torture, where shoots of bamboo would grow through the bodies of prisoners. Imperial Japan made use of brutal human experimentation. Their notorious research facility known as Unit 731 was ordered by the Japanese emperor. Disguised as a lumber factory, Chinese civilians were taken there to have chemical weapons tested on them. There are accounts of flamethrowers being tested on living subjects. Female test subjects were forced into pregnancy for experimentation, sometimes being injected with animal blood, or bubonic plague, or smallpox. Even children were experimented on without anesthetic. After the war, America granted immunity to many involved, in return for the knowledge they gained at Unit 731. When the Japanese military captured China's capital city, mass rape and murder were committed against its residents. In what is now known as the Rape of Nanking, between 40 and 300,000 civilians were killed, and countless businesses were looted and set on fire. The massacre was so intense that the local Japanese general was shocked to learn what his own soldiers were doing. He was especially concerned about the execution of civilians. But by that time, most of the violence had already been committed. So that's the end of this video. If you want to support this channel, you can do so simply by leaving a like. And if you want more content from me, I have a second channel where I do different videos about different things.